Buster Olney with Armen and Levack on 104.5. The Team live at 5:15. The best of Buster at 6:30. All thanks to Buffalo Wild Wings every single Thursday throughout the Major League Baseball season. Buster, thanks for being with us this week. A-Rod is the best offensive player for the Yankees, Buster. Is that good or is that bad?
Well, it's bad, and it has nothing to do with Alex. I mean, his issues aside. But we opened spring training wondering if he could have any kind of a role in this team because he was 39, he was coming off a full year, and no one knew if he had the bat speed and would he be able to hit. And especially when you have a payroll over $200 million, you don't want to be sitting here saying, boy, we're desperate for Alex Rodriguez's at-bats. But, that's the way it feels. And to be honest with you, I don't know if their offense is necessarily going to get a lot better this year because, and I think we talked about this in the past, when you talk to scouts in spring training in an era in which teams are using defensive shifts so aggressively, they are the most shiftable team in baseball. Out of the top 48 players since the start of 2014, the Yankees have 5 guys in their lineup in terms of who shifted against the most. They have an older, slower team with guys who pull the ball, so it means that every day, against Brian McCann, Mark Teixeira, Carlos Beltran, et cetera, you're going to see teams employ the shift, and it hurts the Yankees more than I think any other team.
Well, if they're not going to score runs, that means they have to stop people from scoring. Yeah. What's going wrong with this improved defense? 11 errors already on the year.
Yeah, they're completely perplexed by it, and they believe that it's going to get better. And that obviously is going to have to start with Didi Gregorius, who just looks like he's anxious. I don't know if you guys have gotten a chance to talk to Didi, but he's a great kid. He seems relaxed. He seems completely at ease. We spoke with him in spring training. But I wonder if being around a group of new teammates, if he's feeling the pressure of trying to prove himself to them. He gets asked a lot of questions about replacing Derek Jeter. I really don't think that's what it's about. I think it's more about just settling in with a new group of guys that you're accountable to, and he hasn't played well. And look, if their offense is not going to be better, there's no question that their margin for error is not going to be as good as it has been in past years, and that means the defense has to be better than what it's been. And if it's not, then they're going to have a hard time.
Buster, I mean, when you bring up, Didi stumbling and not, maybe the spotlight's a little rough, he's trying to impress people, it brings back memories of me to Chuck Knobloch and how hard it was for him to play in New York. Is it potentially that bad?
I don't think so. And I covered all 4 years of Chuck when I was at the New York Times, and there's no question. I mean, he arrived, remembering the names of every reporter on the beat, being as helpful as possible, and then before the end of spring training, he made this really weird throw into the first base dugout at Legends Field. I'll never forget it. I can still see it in my mind's eye, and that was sort of the beginning of the end of putting that type of pressure on himself. I don't think that's going to happen with Didi. I think he's a much more relaxed person than Chuck, who was super intense. I think just never settled in, certainly on defense with the Yankees.
Buster Olney with Armen and Levack on 104.5. The Team, thanks to Buffalo Wild Wings. Buster, CC Sabathia, he's thrown well enough for the Yankees to win in his first 2 outings. Should that simply be our expectations for him and nothing more?
That's what I think. I think one thing that's got to happen with CC is that the media members who cover the team, including myself, we sort of need to ratchet back on what we talk about with CC. Okay, we get it. He's 34, 35 years old. He's not going to be the same pitcher. What's interesting though is that when you talk to the Yankees people about CC's stuff, they're actually pretty happy with it. Like they're happy with his velocity. They think that some of his other pitches have actually been pretty good, and there is one statistic that kind of gives me pause and makes me think, you know what, I want to see more of CC to see exactly how he's going to be. There's this great number called FIP, Fielding Independent Pitching, and among all the pitchers in baseball qualified in this statistic, 90 starting pitchers, you know where CC Sabathia ranked after his first 2 starts? In other words, these are numbers based on how he should have, what his ERA should have been, based on where the type of stuff he was giving up. Among 90 pitchers, he ranked second.
Whoa!
And that suggests that you know what? Some of the defensive issues may have affected him more than they've affected other guys. And, maybe, the fact that he's not walking anybody and he's striking out, maybe we can expect better things out of him. But that number really surprised me, and I'm curious to see if we see more of that as we go along here.
Buster, I'm lifelong Yankee fan. They pick on me all the time.
Pinstripe pants.
I look at this team and I don't see an identity. Like, I don't know who they are. Am I just missing it, or is it that foggy right now?
No, I don't think there's any question about that, and I think eventually that they're two models for what the Yankees could be in my mind. Based on what we've seen in recent years. One would be the Kansas City Royals, which seems weird because they're athletic and they got guys running all over the place. But the Royals won last year essentially because they had a great defense and a dominant bullpen. And I know the Yankees bullpen was not good last night against the Orioles, but that's something they could be. And the other team that would possibly be a model for them are the Giants of recent years, where, the Giants haven't been a great offensive team. They've had two or three guys who were pretty good, but what the Giants have done is pitch well and play good defense and respond in big spots. And I think we do know this. The Yankees have, between Jacoby Ellsbury and Brett Gardner, two guys that could put pressure on defense, but they got to be efficient in manufacturing runs if they have any chance of being that type of team. Because I don't think there's any question that based on what we've seen early in the year, the Red Sox have an unbelievable lineup in terms of what they're running out there. Lots of firepower and also lots of vulnerability in their starting rotation, which is not very good. The Toronto Blue Jays have a powerful lineup. So the Yankees have to be in this division what the Giants have been in the National League West, this team which plays really efficient baseball. And if they don't do that, they're not going to win.
Buster Olney, thanks to Buffalo Wild Wings with Armen and Levack on 104.5 The Team. And Buster, obviously, we're your home for Yankees baseball. But, man, I promise, we're not trying to be negative on the Mets all the time. I feel like every time we got to talk about the Mets with you, there's some negative overtones. And let's start with this one. Henry Mejia becomes the fourth player this season to fail the PED test. How is this happening? How are guys still failing the PED test when they know they're getting tested?
Well, we should start with this. There was a recent poll in ESPN, the magazine, and players anonymously gave estimates on where they think the PED use is in baseball right now, and the most popular number was 10%. And that's probably higher than what a lot of people might expect, especially when you read sports writers, and I disagree with this phrase a lot when they talk about, we reached the end of the steroid era. That's never ending. There's always a generation of players coming up, especially fringe guys who are looking for an advantage, and it's pretty clear from what we've seen with guys like Melky Cabrera, Irvin Santana. Guys, crime pays in baseball. If you get caught, okay, you lose some money, but if you get a multi-year deal, ultimately it pays off. Now, I don't know, the exact circumstance of Mejia's suspension. It is interesting that he's one of four players who's gotten nailed so far this year with this old-fashioned Soviet Union-era steroid, stanozol, I can't even pronounce it, stanozol, which is the same steroid that Ben Johnson got nailed for in the 1988 Olympics. And I know baseball is asking a question of, okay, what's the common denominator between these four guys to have this pop up all at once in the same spring training? You got to believe it's not a complete coincidence.
It makes me feel a lot better that Buster has a hard time saying stanozol as well, because we were dying on that the other day. But Buster, what did the Mets do without Henry Mejia? How much does this impact these 80 games that he suspended?
Well, it impacts it because he was supposed to be an important part of the bullpen. But I will say this: if you look at possible issues that they might have, this is one where they probably are well positioned with their depth in their organization to have alternatives. And I talked to the Mets executives, and we haven't gotten into specifics about who's the closest, who's the second closest reliever to being a guy that they would trust. But they've got a lot of great arms in their farm system. So they presumably will be able to plug this. And we see this every year with teams where they have a hole in the bullpen, but the bullpen that they have in April can be fixed by June. So that's not as big of an issue as what's going on with David Wright. I mean, to have a strained hamstring from a guy that you're going to need to rely on. This exposes the Mets' Achilles heel, which is the depth in their everyday position players. We saw them on opening day when they played the Nationals, and I talked to people on the team at that time, and I said, my read on your team is it's all a question of how healthy can your everyday starters last. And I got back a lot of nods saying, yep, no question about it, because they don't have a lot of depth behind their 8 starting players.
I mean, this David Wright being down, this is one more injury in a long list of injuries that seem to sideline the Mets' chances. Can they withstand this? I mean, is there enough to muddle through at third base until Wright comes back?
Well, if that question's framed by the desire or the issue of whether or not they're going to win the National League East, I think a lot of the question is, do the Washington Nationals continue to grind along here and not play well? Are they going to run away? The Marlins had, a good spring training, but they got off to a poor start. They won the last couple games, but they lost Henderson Alvarez to elbow and shoulder issues. And how much is that going to drag them down? Will the Atlanta Braves be real, or is this just a mirage, which is what I think it is? So a lot of the issue for the Mets, I think, is going to be whether or not some other team in the division has the firepower to run away. And maybe the Nationals at some point are able to do that. I will say this, is that once every 5 days, when Matt Harvey pitches, they're one of the 1 or 2 or 3 best teams in baseball. I mean, he's that good early on. Jacob deGrom obviously is tremendous. That starting pitching really changed the dynamic of what they might be. And so we'll see if that can, keep them in as long as they continue to, suffer injuries like the Wright injury. And we'll see if the front office, the ownership, at some point steps up and says, you know what, we're going to upgrade this team because we think we might be good enough to make the playoffs.
Buster Olney, thanks to Buffalo Wild Wings with Armen Levack on 104.5 The Team. And Buster, you wrote a great column at ESPN.com about Jon Lester and his early struggles in Chicago this year.
Yeah, and I tell you what, it's an eye-opener. And I when I saw the Red Sox people last weekend, I was asking a number of them the question of, how did you guys keep these throwing yips under wraps for so long? Because they certainly did. He didn't have a pickoff attempt from April 30th of 2013 all the way to earlier this week. And when he finally attempted one against the Cincinnati Reds, the first one, which was a lob to Anthony Rizzo, that was relatively on target. The second one missed the target by 15 feet. And, we were talking about Chuck Knobloch. It looked like that. He's got throwing yips. And it's an issue. The Cardinals game planned against it in the first game of the season. The Reds game planned against it the other day. The runners are taking huge leads. It's going to be an issue for Lester going forward. I would say the one difference between Lester and Knobloch is that it seems like in the last 24 or 48 hours, Lester, unlike Knobloch, he's not in denial. He at least is coming out, acknowledging it. Joe Madden, the Cubs manager, is acknowledging this problem. I always thought the toughest thing for Chuck in dealing with this thing was for a year and a half, he'd look you right in the eye and say, I don't know what you're talking about. What do you mean throwing issues? And, as he bounced 3 throws into the stands. And I know that there were players on that team who always felt uncomfortable bringing it up because Chuck was so tense and so proud, and he didn't want to talk about it.
Buster, I get the impression what you're saying is the Red Sox are evil and they hid this.
No, they were smart. And from what I understand, when they have the pitcher's fielding practice in spring training, they'd have Lester do his on a backfield where knuckleheads like me and the media weren't around and they couldn't see what was going on. But let's face it, until they faced the Royals in that one-game playoff last year when Lester was with Oakland, no one really talked about this. The fact that he didn't like to try pickoffs, but it's not only pickoff throws; it's throws to any base. Wow. When he was with the Red Sox, from what I understand, they would alter their infield defense, and they would essentially tell the third baseman, "Look, anything on the ground on your half of the field, you got it, because the other guy's not going to take it."
Buster, Jeter said this week that he doesn't miss baseball. That surprised you at all? No.
I really, I think that he was, and I think we talked about it last year a little bit about, whether not Derek would cry during the course of the year. I think that, Derek, he's someone who was looking forward to the next challenges in life. He's a competitive guy. He's doing this Players Tribune thing. I'm sure at some point he'll own a team. but I don't think that his relationship with the Yankees was warm and fuzzy. And we know this because unlike Mariano Rivera, Jorge Posada, Tino Martinez, Andy Pettitte, he didn't show up to spring training. He's not going to Yankee Stadium. And I talked to a mutual friend of his the other day who told me, he said, unless there's some event where they're retiring, Posada's number or some issue like that, he said he didn't think Derek's going to go.
Wow. The Yankees are so good with their legends, though, with the assistants and the guys that help out during spring training. What was it about the relationship with Jeter? Do we know specifically?
No, and I want to make it clear that what I'm going to say is total speculation. The negotiations that he had with the Yankees the last couple times around were not easy. You guys remember that one where it leaked out that Derek was looking for $150 million. The Yankees were offering something in the range of $30 million. There was a huge gap. That was not warm and fuzzy. The stuff that went on in a lot of cases in recent years, it wasn't warm and fuzzy. It was very professional. It feels like it's an antiseptic relationship right now. And you know what? And maybe my speculation is completely wrong, and maybe it's more of a case of Derek was around baseball fields for 22, 23 years, and now he's enjoying his life away from it. And I totally get that because I'll bump into players who retired, and I'd say, so a lot of them I ask, how's it going? He goes, it's unbelievable. I get to actually spend time with my kids. I get to be someplace other than a ballpark every night during the course of summer.
And that makes sense, too. Buster Olney, check out his work at ESPN.com, of course, on Baseball Tonight, Sports Center, and Sunday Night Baseball all the time. Buster, appreciate it, man. Had fun this week. We'll do it again next week.
That sounds good. Levack, feel better.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.